I struggle when people ask me what I do. I'm like, I'm a primatologist. Oh, wait, no, I'm a botanist. Oh, wait, I'm a naturalist. It doesn't compute. I'm kind of I don't even know what my own job title is at this point. So instead of that triggering in my brain, oh, I'm not actually anything, I should have just committed to one thing that I can, what am I even doing with my life? I'm surrounded by people that are also like, we're doing this too, and it's a really beautiful life.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 Initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Welcome to Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, in association with the Explorers Club. I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Our next guest is a New York City girl who managed to fuse art, science, and believe it or not, the story of self-medicating chimpanzees and traditional healers. She and I actually share some roots. We both went to Brown University. And if that weren't enough, we actually both threw the javelin there. She is an explorer in every sense, crossing boundaries of geography, culture, and discipline. Welcome to the show, Elodie Freymann.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
It is so funny and so random that you used to throw the javelin and I used to throw the javelin.
I know, it's like the randomest possible sport you could possibly do. So that's shocking to me.
So you're originally from New York City. Did you pick up the javelin there?
Yes, I did. And through a very embarrassing way. I had just gotten to high school. I knew I wanted to be on the track and field team. I wanted to be outside. I really fancied myself a runner. I was like, I'm going to be such a fast sprinter. I go in for my first, race. Everyone's watching. Gun goes off, starting block, immediately trip and fall. Don't make it. I hobble across the finish line and I say, that's it. I have to quit the team. This is so embarrassing. So I went to my coach and I said, I have to quit. I'm so sorry. I can't be here anymore. And he said, well, you actually can't quit at this point, but you can leave the track part and join the field part if you don't want to run. So I picked up a javelin, and because I grew up doing judo, that was like my primary sport. I was a big martial arts person. I have this really strong right shoulder from doing all of the judo moves, It's the same muscle group, turns out, that you need to throw the javelin. So I took to the javelin really quickly, and then I wound up just becoming sort of obsessed with it. I loved it, and I did it throughout high school, and then I continued on to do it at Brown for a bit.
Well, I have to tell you something funny. So I have two 15-year-old boys who took up the javelin last spring. So my backyard, which they do practice on, has holes all over it because that's
totally part of the sport.
So you have such an eclectic journey. I really was looking forward to speaking to you. So, New York City people in general, making a generalization, can't imagine themselves living anywhere else. And yet you somehow ended up in rainforests and jungles. What was the journey that led you there? What did you study at Brown?
That's such a good question. The journey was winding. The pathway was very, very nonlinear. So in high school, I thought I was going to be an artist and a creative writer. That was sort of my dream. And I got to Brown and I wound up, because Brown has this famously open curriculum, which is one of the reasons I wanted to go there. I knew I had all of these very disparate interests that didn't necessarily make logical sense with one another. I liked art, but I loved animals and I loved people and stories and I liked storytelling. So I was just like, what do I possibly do with this? So I went to Brown and I basically took a class in like every possible topic you could take a class in. I took bookmaking. I took, silkscreen poster making. I took history of Afghanistan. I took invertebrate zoology. I took everything that I could possibly take to just say like, okay, well, let me just figure this out. Maybe there'll be something that everything merges together. And I wound up in anthropology, which was a perfect fit, turns out, because it was kind of a way of studying. You're studying people, but through people, you can study all of these disparate topics. So I was really interested in botany as one of my, obsessions. So I got really interested in ethnobotany, so how people interact with plants in their environment. So I found it a nice way of getting to touch on lots of different, interdisciplinary topics, but through the lens of people and culture. From there, it continued to be windy. I wound up after college working in documentary filmmaking for a little bit in New York. I returned to New York, as all New Yorkers inevitably do. I had this fascination with chimpanzees from the time I was really young. And I also had this fascination with medicinal plants from the time I was very young. And when I realized that wild chimpanzees take medicinal plants and use medicines in the wild, I was like, that's it. It's now or never. I kind of in my head thought I can always go back to art and I can always go back to the creative side, but I can't necessarily always go back to school to study the scientific side, which isn't true. But in my 24-year-old brain, that was kind of the ultimatum to myself. So I said, okay, I'm going to quit my job very hesitantly because I loved my job. I'm going to do a 9-month master's to try to study chimpanzee self-medication with medicinal plants somehow. And then I'm going to go back and continue work in documentaries. And so I moved to England. I started a master's at Oxford and I went, and then the pandemic hit. And I suddenly was in quarantine, in Massachusetts. And I was just so in love with what I was studying. And I had applied for a PhD kind of right before the pandemic hit, kind of throwing out something into the ether, not thinking I was going to get it, not thinking I was going to get the funding. And then cut to almost 5-6 years later, I am still studying chimpanzee self-medication and kind of every day questioning how it is I got to be here, but very happy that life turned out this way.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. You just unloaded a lot of things that each one of them sort of, should have a line of questioning. Was there somebody who inspired you to go this? The generalization of New York City is people can't see themselves living outside of New York City. And I know that you went to Uganda to study chimpanzees, which is really, couldn't be any more night and day than New York City.
A lot of people inspired me. And it's true, New Yorkers were magnetized back to the home base. It's a magnetic city and it's an amazing city. And I didn't really think I was ever going to leave it, but I was very fortunate as a kid to have gotten to experience life outside of New York. My parents would take us upstate where there was forests and access to the natural world. And I think it was the juxtaposition that got me really addicted to nature. When you can compare the, concrete jungle to the ferns and forests of the natural world, when you go back to the concrete, you miss it. And I think my parents definitely cultivated in me a love for the natural world and a respect for the natural world. And I'm very, very grateful for them for giving me that access when I was a child. When I'm in a city, I kind of always have a calling to go and, touch grass and be surrounded. I'm my happiest when I'm surrounded by trees. And that's just something I've known since I was very young. And of course, and if we're talking about, people that inspired that, I think growing up and reading the books of Jane Goodall obviously conjured fantasies of being in the jungle following wild chimpanzees. And I think that's something that was an image that stuck in my head from the time I was like 9 years old. So I had these fantasies of what life could be like as a scientist in the forest, living with wild animals. And I just sort of kind of chased that, I think, for...
Jane Goodall is a fantastic person. She really is. I've met her several times. I think she's as close to a living saint as I've met, and so revered. But I think the one thing about being Jane Goodall, there were some choices she had to make and some things that I think she had to make major sacrifices in her own personal life to be Jane Goodall. You ever think, I wonder if this route is going to take me on a lonely path?
All the time. Yeah, it's definitely true. That's something that I think people don't talk about so much in field sciences or, scientists, especially people that work in the field and have to leave home for long periods of time. There's compromises, certainly. And it does sort of, during my PhD, I didn't live in the same place for more than a month or two for like quite a few years. It was very disrupted, and you make a group of friends and then you have to go to the field and you come back and everyone's gone and you have to start again. But it's a great segue to say that in the new projects that I'm working on, so I've just started a new project in the Peruvian Amazon, which I know is a total 180 from chimpanzees. In this new project, it's in collaboration with Dr. Rosa Vasquez Espinoza, who's also EC50, also a member of the Explorers Club, amazing human being.
Amazing.
And she's trying to do there, and I think what we've talked about a lot is how to make field work and the life of a field worker sustainable from the personal side. So we just did an expedition together. She brought her husband, I brought my boyfriend, and we had, it felt suddenly like more community oriented. It didn't feel solitary. And the experience was just so cool because you get to share it with, people that you love. Finding more sustainable ways for scientists to, not have to give up their personal life to do what they love. I think there are ways that big science can make things more sustainable for scientists.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you'll discover, if you do this long enough, there really is a community, and that you can really pop into any corner of the world and you're going to find something who kind of gets what you do.
I mean, that's 100% true. I think the friends that I've made in the field are incredibly, incredibly dear to me. And I say, you have to leave your friends who live in your home behind, and that is sad. But the people you meet, as you said, are incredible, and they're collaborators and they're colleagues. And when you're in the field, especially for long periods of time, you really make a community where you are. And that's been such a gift to have friends all over the world. I was just WhatsApping last night with some friends from my last expedition in Peru. It makes you feel, like you can't be alone if you just step out and immerse yourself in the place. And you're the science. I mean, should be obvious, but your science is made better when you don't live in a silo. We don't just parachute in. There's an issue, I think, historically with researchers coming into a new place to do field work and then not engaging with local communities and just sort of existing within a bubble. And that is not how good science is ever going to get done, nor good conservation, nor are you going to do justice to your project. So it's all about community.
I'd have to say, from my perspective, I've been in this game longer than you. And the biggest trend, or positive trend, I'd say, is the inclusion of local communities and local wisdom and knowledge and observations, and even, what in the past wasn't traditionally said as science,
Right.
but is very relevant. It was funny. I was riding a train from New York City just yesterday, and I was flipping through online stories, and your story about self-medicating chimpanzees actually came up on my feed.
That's amazing.
So suddenly you're in Uganda. How did you get there? Tell us about that.
It was all a bit of a fluke, actually. I started my PhD. It was the pandemic. Finding a field site is actually very hard to do. And I was kind of struggling. I didn't really know where to start. I was emailing, site heads at various chimpanzee sites, but it was a pandemic. Everything was kind of closed down. A spot opened up. I was in the right place at the right time. I was vaccinated because I was in the US before most people in Europe were. So the site opened up for someone who was vaccinated, and I basically had like a month and a half to prepare for my first field season. The site was in Uganda, where there are wonderful communities of wild chimpanzees that are habituated, so used to researchers following them around for study, but they're completely wild. And I kind of showed up very green, not really knowing what I was doing. I had unbelievable supervision by one of my PhD supervisors, Dr. Kat Hobader, who is like fieldwork goddess. She spent the majority of her life in the field at this point. And so I really feel fortunate to have been trained right from the start from someone who really, really knew what she was doing. So that was wonderful. And then, of course, all of the local field staff at the station that I was at were like invaluable as teachers. They're the ones that have all of the knowledge. They're the ones that understand the chimpanzees. They're the ones that are teaching the students that come from other places about what each chimpanzee behavior means and how to interpret it. And of course, not given enough credit. That's something that some colleagues and I are trying to rectify with a new journal that we've launched for field staff members to write about their perspectives and their experience. They're the best teachers of all time. They understand what makes chimpanzees tick. But I spent a lot of that first field season, because it was COVID, as one of the only researchers at the site, obviously surrounded by the amazing local staff, and had to figure out from scratch, like, what is a chimpanzee? What do chimpanzees do? How do they behave? I had read all of this literature, but as field workers know, you can read about chimpanzees, you can read about any animal's behavior, and then you look at an animal and they're, completely counter to everything that you've been reading about in the literature. So the first field season was just a blur. It was amazing. It was so much learning. And I wasn't just learning about the chimps. I was also trying to learn how to identify all the plants and just learn more about the ecosystem that was completely—
even how to live yourself.
And how to use a pit latrine and how to, brace myself for cold shower at the end of the day when I had missed the hot water. And being in the field is a constant adventure. And I can't stress that enough. Every day there is something new. There's, a venomous snake in your room, or army ants have invaded. At one point I brought all these books and I left them on my shelf for a little bit too long, and I came to read one and termites had eaten all the pages. So you're constantly learning tricks to survive, but I love it and it makes me very happy.
Hey, so let's get on to the self-medicating chimps. Was this something that you went there to research, or is it something observationally?
I came with that in mind as my project, but I also came not really knowing how I was going to do it. Going in, I had done my master's on chimpanzee medicinal plant use, and then I started my PhD in the same topic, but I arrived really not knowing what I was going to find. And part of that was that it's just a really understudied topic. We don't really know much about chimpanzee self-medication. We're learning more every day. But when I started my PhD in 2020, there had been research over the years, but there hadn't been kind of the attention around it that we've gotten in the last few years. So it had kind of sort of sunk into the background of chimpanzee research. Because of that, there weren't a lot of methods or precedent for starting at a new site. What I did was I really came in with just an open mind. I tried to use really interdisciplinary methods, and I tried to take data on absolutely everything. I was recording chimpanzee behavior. I was collecting medicinal plants. I was collecting a lot of chimpanzee poop to look at parasite loads. I was standing under trees with urine strips trying to get the chimp to pee on my strip so I could see if they had any sort of infections. If there was something that happened, I was either filming it on my camcorder, or I was writing it down, or I was coding it on my iPad. I took as much data as possible, because later, and it wound up being really, really important, I wound up having to really triangulate all the data that I had to sort of tell stories, which was fun and felt more of drawing back to my training as an anthropologist at Brown. That's really what you do when you conduct an ethnography. You spend a lot of time with people, and then you sort of have all of these notes, and you have to kind of say, okay, I have all of these observations, and what does this all mean? And you do a synthesis. And that is really what I wound up doing as my analysis for the papers that came out of that project. Was all these different types of interdisciplinary data from all these different fields, and how does it come together to tell a story? And so really, I think the way I think about it is, what I did is sort of an ethnography on chimpanzees. I kind of used anthropological methods combined with lots of other different scientific, methods as well, to tell a story about what I think is happening in that site. I wound up focusing on a few medicinal trees that are used locally by people who live in forest edge communities, and they use these trees as medicines. And so right off the bat, when I arrived at the site, I knew, okay, these are some really important medicinal resources. We know they have medicinal uses. Let's see if the chimps are using them as well. And so I was looking at bark feeding specifically as kind of my main focus. So which barks of these medicinal trees chimpanzees were eating. And bark is not a very nutritious resource. It's, high in lignin. It's hard to digest. Doesn't have that many, nutrients. It's a low quality food by, all accounts, but yet chimpanzees seek out and eat the bark of some of these highly medicinal resources. So basically and there was many kind of mini projects that came out of this paper, but kind of for me, the most fascinating thing was trying to prove that some of these barks, they could be a medicine rather than just a normal average everyday food. And we found some really cool things. And we also I looked into wound care. So what chimps were doing when they had open wounds. And yeah, it was watching the chimps, trying to identify chimps that were not feeling so well, and then trying to see what they did. And if anything was kind of out of the ordinary, we honed in.
So what was the big aha moment? The one thing that you were like, wow, I can't believe this is actually happening.
There were a couple. There was one day where it was funny. It was an aha moment, but it was just me sitting under a tree and kind of putting pieces together. And actually it it all comes back to the Explorers Club, as it always does. I had gotten a grant from the Explorers Club, which is how I first got involved, to make a short documentary film about my research. And I had my friend from Brown, who was my college roommate, who's an amazing documentary filmmaker and editor. I was going to bring him for 2 weeks to come to Uganda with me and film part of the project. And it was the last 2 weeks of my field season for my PhD. So stakes were really high. And he was about to come. I think he was a few days away from arriving. And I was thinking, I don't know what this film is going to be about. And I have to, we're going to have 2 weeks to film a documentary. And I don't really know how I'm going to tell this story. So I was thinking about not actually about my PhD work or the science side. I was thinking about what story can we make this documentary about? I have a few days and a grant that I need to uphold. I was sitting under a big tree, which is called Estonia bunai. And this tree, I picked up one of the leaves and I was kind of thinking about it absentmindedly. My brain was like, Estonia bunai, this is actually a really important tree for the project. And I realized that I had all of this evidence about that particular tree that I was sitting under to prove it was a medicine. And I know it sounds really silly, like how did you not think about that before? But I think, again, because I had all of these different pots of data and I hadn't really gotten to the synthesis phase, I knew that it had kept coming up, but I hadn't really sat down and thought about it critically. But it turned out that it was a tree that is really, really important in local nearby forest edge communities, human communities, as a medicine. It's used for malaria, which is a huge problem in the area. It's also interestingly used as an abortive for unwanted pregnancies, but it's used really for basically as an antibiotic, antiviral of sorts. It was also, I knew, used by the chimpanzees, and they would take tiny, tiny, tiny bites. Did not seem like they ate the bark of this tree in the way that they ate barks of other trees. It was a tiny, tiny amount, and it was super, super, super bitter, and it was very rare. And I had seen that they targeted it during certain months of the year, which were actually the months where respiratory infections tend to spike. And it all just sort of suddenly came together. And then the twist of it all was that it's also one of the most logged trees in the forest because it's used, of all things, it's used to make gutters, and it's also used to build coffins. So suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, I have this story about this tree and it all makes sense. And it was actually in having to tell the story from a science communication side that I kind of wound up having my scientific eureka moment, which is another example of why art is so important for informing science and science is important for informing art. They feed each other. I think we forget that often.
I agree 100% with that because in the end, it's all about storytelling. And if you are going to impact people with a project or a story, it has to reach outside of the tent of your science community.
It's why we're doing the work in the first place.
Do you know where any of this is taking you? I mean, have you thought about it? I mean, you're still very young for a scientist. Is it a path that you think you're just going to wind and who knows? Or do you think you're becoming more focused, or does it worry you that you have so many ideas? I mean, a lot of ideas is not a bad thing.
I am certainly not becoming more focused. I am becoming less focused, but I think I'm leaning into that in this moment. I think it's kind of breaking my heart as I shift away, as my next project is not about chimps. I miss them so much. And every day I have this pang of like, oh, should I have just, stuck with chimps as my next project and spent my life doing chimps? I will, really, really work at returning to chimps. I want to keep working with chimps. They're my first love. But I also realize that, at my age, now is the time to kind of diversify. I knew that if I kept on, I stayed studying chimps, I could very happily do that for the rest of my life, but I want to see other parts of the world. I want to study other animals. I want to work with other communities. And I think what I'm trying to do with this new project in Peru is see whether or not my methods from Uganda are translatable to a completely new site with new animals, and try to create sort of like a toolkit for people that want to study animal self-medication, because it's a famously hard thing to study. Every aspect is hard. It's hard to know that the animals are sick. It's hard to be in the right place at the right time and catch them doing the medicinal behavior. It's hard to prove it's a medicinal behavior. It's like a stacked deck against you and trying to make a discovery. I want to tackle that issue. I want to try to find methods that can make it more studyable, especially in sites like in the site in Peru where we are. You can actually see the animals there. They're very shy and they're not habituated to people. So we're doing everything through camera trapping and trying to use different forensic methods to try to see what's going on when we're not there. So it's a new challenge, and I'm really, really excited to, I mean, the Amazon has also always been a dream site. So to answer your question, I do have a lot of things that I'm obsessed with and a lot of things that I'm passionate about and a lot of interests. And right now, I probably down the line, it's unsustainable and I'm going to have to, narrow my scope a bit. But right now I'm trying to just see where the world takes me and say yes to opportunities. And, the more science and the more diverse projects, the better. I'm just kind of trying to see the world and study the animals and protect it.
Well, I'm kind of envious because I think that the more you learn, the more you want to learn, and that the world is so exciting, so interesting that you don't have to just look at one thing and say, I'm interested in this. I think, a very evolved person is going to be interested in a lot. So let me ask you this. What's the best advice you ever got?
I'll keep it scientific because I've gotten a lot of amazing advice over the years, but the first thing that comes to mind when you're just in terms of being in the field and studying something that's hard to study, I think it's really easy to be hard on yourself and to think, I'm never going to solve this. I'm never going to solve this problem. I'm wrong about this. You second guess yourself. You're never going to get the data you want. You're never going to see the thing that you have been waiting to see. But all you can really do is the best that you can. And I remind myself that all the time when I'm feeling imposter syndrome or I've, thrown a sample away that was really important, or I just say, I did the best I can. I collected the data I collected. It was impossible to collect more. It was impossible to see that animal do that thing. Don't beat yourself up.
So Elodie, do you really have imposter syndrome, or do you feel guilty for having such a fertile, mind? I mean, sometimes I think people feel guilty that maybe they've had more opportunities, or when I was younger, I used to ascribe things to luck. But, gosh, if you have imposter syndrome, I think the rest of us are truly screwed.
I absolutely have imposter syndrome. I have imposter syndrome all the time. I constantly am scared that I'm going to be outed as someone that isn't actually a scientist and everything I've published is wrong. Every time I have a paper out, I have a panic attack. Every time a paper comes out and people are reading it, I'm like, someone's going to realize that I was wrong about everything and I'm going to be, a public embarrassment. So I think it's just part of the human condition. You're constantly second guessing. Well, maybe this isn't for everyone, but I remind myself, I did the best I can. I worked really hard. I really back this. I believe in it. And I talk myself down and I remember that I deserve to be in the room. And being surrounded by other community members, like the Explorers Club really has done this for me, has been, and I'm not just plugging the Explorers Club, but it's true. It's given me a community of people that are kind of similarly, we don't fit into a box. I struggle when people ask me what I do. I'm like, I'm a primatologist. Oh, wait, no, I'm a botanist. Oh, wait, I'm a naturalist. It doesn't compute. I'm kind of I don't even know what my own job title is at this point. So, and the Explorers Club has surrounded me by people that are similarly like that. And so instead of that triggering in my brain, oh, I'm not actually anything, I should have just committed to one thing that I can, what am I even doing with my life? I'm surrounded by people that are also like, we're doing this too. And it's a really beautiful life and we're doing important work. And I think being surrounded by other like-minded folks that are doing kind of out of the box things has really made me feel less and less over the years of that sort of that self-doubt and that imposter syndrome.
So Elodie, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Keep with it. I think I'm one of those weird people that sort of decided when I was like 5 years old what I wanted to do. And either through just pure stubbornness or that I was just genuinely really attuned to my own self when I was 5. But I knew that I wanted to study chimps, when I was a kid. And I knew that I wanted to be a naturalist. All of these things I decided very resolutely when I was young. And then over the years, I thought, oh, this is impossible. I'm not actually going to be able to do that. I think I would tell my younger self, it's totally possible. Oh, you know what a big one is? You don't have to be a math genius to be a scientist. That is something that really was the wrench for me in around high school when I started, dropping, my math grades started dropping. I thought, you know what? I love chimps. I love the natural world. I want to be a scientist, but I can't be because I'm not great at math. It's not true. And it turns out that if you have something you love, like chimpanzees, for example, you will learn how to do the math you need to do to study the thing that you love to do. So it's not, don't write yourself off. If it's not your strongest subject, you can still be a scientist. And that's something that I really hope that young people are hearing more and more. Because for me, it was a binary, math and science, art and history, and you're either one camp or another.
Elodie, I hope I stay in touch with you because it's such an interesting path you're on. And you say you could not fit in a box. And I'm even looking at the room you're in. It's not a box, it's circular.
It's a circle.
So maybe there are no mistakes. But thank you so much for sharing this. And I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was wonderful to be on.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support, so make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.